I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts. But I don't see myself being queen of this country.
Beneath the glittering chandeliers of the royal halls, a single voice returned to haunt the crown. It was not a voice of the present, but of the past. Princess Diana, the people's princess, left behind more than memories. She left a final message, captured on video, one that had remained hidden until now. When the recording was played before the royal family, gasps echoed through the room. Her sons fought back tears, and the queen remained still. But all eyes soon turned toward Camilla, whose silence spoke louder than words. This is the story of Diana's final message and its shocking impact, the hidden recording. For years, whispers floated in the air like smoke around a flame, elusive yet impossible to ignore. It was said that before her untimely death, Princess Diana had recorded a message, a video that was never intended for the eyes of the public. Unlike the carefully composed television interviews and polished photographs the world had seen, this was different. This was Diana, stripped of royal formality, speaking from her heart with the weight of truth pressing upon her. She had always known that her words carried power, and perhaps that was why she chose to record them in secret, away from the scrutiny of the palace walls. The idea of such a recording was intoxicating. For those within the royal household, it was a threat. What could she have said that might shatter the fragile balance between duty and scandal? For her sons, it was a promise, a lingering connection to the mother who loved them fiercely, yet had been torn from them far too soon. For the public, it was a mystery waiting to be solved, a ghostly echo of the woman they called the people's princess. Diana understood better than anyone that history has a way of burying inconvenient truths beneath layers of ceremony. She had felt the sharp edge of isolation in those gilded halls. She had seen the way secrets were swept under ornate rugs, never spoken of again, while the world beyond the palace gates remained in the dark. Perhaps this recording was her attempt to leave behind her own testimony, unedited and undeniable. No one outside her closest circle truly knew when or where she filmed it. Some claimed it was captured during those lonely nights in Kensington Palace when she walked the corridors in quiet reflection. Others whispered that it might have been made during one of her secret getaways, far from the eyes of the press. Wherever it was created, the recording was said to be raw, her voice filled with both courage and sorrow, as though she understood the urgency of documenting her truth before it was too late. The palace, of course, would never acknowledge its existence. Denial had always been the preferred weapon of the monarchy. To admit that Diana had left behind a message would mean conceding that she had a voice beyond the grave, one that could still rival the power of the throne. For years, the tape was spoken of in hushed tones, passed like a secret between those who dared to wonder. Was it real, or was it only legend, a story crafted by those who could not bear to let her memory rest? Yet legends have a way of holding fragments of truth. And for those who knew Diana, the idea of her recording a final message was not far-fetched at all. She was a woman who defied expectations, who turned her vulnerability into strength and her suffering into a mirror that reflected the pain of millions. If anyone would dare to leave behind a final word, it would be her. And so the rumor of the hidden recording lingered, growing louder with each passing year, a haunting possibility that somewhere, perhaps locked away in a vault or guarded in silence, Princess Diana's unfiltered voice waited for its moment to return. Whispers inside the palace. The story of the hidden recording lingered like a storm cloud over the monarchy, and while the world outside speculated, those within the palace walls lived with the weight of it. The whispers of its existence had seeped through corridors, across polished floors, and into private drawing rooms where secrets were traded like currency. Servants spoke in lowered voices, advisors shifted uneasily, and courtiers avoided eye contact whenever Diana's name arose. The monarchy thrived on control, yet here was something they could not touch, a ghost of truth that threatened to unravel the carefully woven fabric of their authority. Linking back to that whispered legend, the recording became more than rumor. It was a shadow that haunted conversations at the highest level. What if Diana had indeed spoken openly about her life, her fears, her marriage, and the deep fractures behind the palace facade. The danger was not simply in what she might have revealed, but in how her words would be received by those who had always adored her. For Diana was not just a princess, she was a symbol. To millions, she was compassion embodied, a woman who spoke the language of the people in a world of rigid tradition. To those bound by the crown, she was a problem that refused to fade. Inside the palace, the whispers grew louder during family gatherings where silence said more than words. Some of the older royals dismissed it as gossip, a story fabricated by journalists eager to keep Diana's flame burning. Yet others felt an unease that could not be shaken. Her voice, if it truly existed on tape, was a power they could not control. And if it was ever released, it would be impossible to bury under royal statements and polite smiles. It would cut through like a blade, sharp and unforgettable. There were stories of drawers locked with keys no one claimed to hold, of safes within safes where something fragile lay untouched. Former aides who had been close to Diana hinted that she had spoken of leaving behind her truth for her sons, a legacy not written on official parchment but spoken in her own words. They never said more, but their silence carried the weight of confirmation. Something was there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for its moment. The monarchy's greatest fear was always vulnerability. Their survival depended on the illusion of perfection, a steady hand guiding the nation. Diana had already fractured that illusion in life through her openness and humanity. In death, she had become untouchable, her memory stronger than the crown itself. And if this recording did exist, then it was more than just her voice. It was her final defiance, a challenge to the silence that the palace demanded. As the years passed, the whispers did not fade. They grew, carried like smoke beyond the palace gates, picked up by journalists, insiders, and even ordinary citizens who swore they had heard of it from someone who knew someone on the inside. It was as though the recording itself had become alive, pulsing with the tension of a secret too large to remain buried. And while the palace worked tirelessly to appear unmoved, the truth was different. Behind those grand walls and guarded smiles, the royal family lived with an unspoken dread. They knew the past has a way of returning, and if Diana's voice was ever heard again, it would echo louder than the crown itself. A nation still haunted by Diana's voice. The palace may have tried to contain the whispers of the hidden recording, but outside its gates, the memory of Diana never needed a secret to stay alive. Her presence remained etched into the hearts of millions, long after her passing. The people clung to her story not as one clings to history, but as one clings to a wound that never heals. It was more than nostalgia. It was unfinished business, a collective longing for answers to questions that had been left hanging in the silence of that fateful night in Paris. Linked to the murmurs within the royal household, the public too felt the weight of something unresolved. They had witnessed Diana speak with a courage that often unsettled the monarchy. She had spoken openly about her struggles, her loneliness, her fractured marriage. She had shown the world that even behind the golden gates of royalty there could be suffering. To ordinary people, that made her real, a mirror of their own humanity. So when stories of a final recording surfaced, the nation listened. And though most would never see it, they believed. They believed because Diana had always spoken the truth, even when it cost her everything. Across Britain, memorials to Diana still stood adorned with flowers decades later, notes left in her honor, and candles burning for a woman gone too soon. Every anniversary of her death brought renewed emotion, crowds gathering at Kensington Palace to leave tokens of remembrance. Her voice lingered in their minds, not just from interviews or speeches, but from the way she had made them feel. They had lost not just a princess, but someone who understood them, someone who bridged the impossible gap between royalty and reality. It was this enduring bond that gave strength to the rumors of her recording. People wanted to believe that somewhere, Diana had left them one last message. It became more than gossip, it became hope. A hope that her voice, unfiltered and free, might surface to remind the world of her enduring love, her warnings, her unshaken resolve. In pubs, in living rooms, in the quiet of late-night conversations, the thought would arise, If Diana had spoken to us one last time, what would she have said? For the monarchy, this was the most dangerous aspect of all. The public's imagination did not need proof. Belief alone was enough to keep Diana's presence alive, louder and stronger than official statements. Each time the royals stepped forward in ceremony, Diana's memory loomed behind them, a reminder of the crown's fragility in the face of her humanity. Her ghost did not fade into silence. It walked with them, spoke with them, and in moments of crisis, it overshadowed them. A nation haunted by her voice was a nation unwilling to let her be forgotten. And that made the possibility of a real recording all the more powerful. For if her spoken words could still reach them, even after death, they would carry the weight of prophecy. They would be received not as history, but as truth breaking through time itself. And in that haunting possibility, the public waited, their ears tuned to the silence, longing for Diana's voice to rise once more. The moment of revelation, the whispers of the palace and the longing of the people eventually converged into a single moment, one that would become etched in memory. For years, the recording was nothing more than a rumor carried on the wind, but when the day came for it to be played, the weight of history pressed heavily on every soul present. It was a private gathering, discreet yet charged with significance. The family, the advisors, and a select few witnesses assembled in a grand but dimly lit room, the kind of space where history always seemed to wait in silence. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, as though the very walls of the palace knew they were about to hear something that could never be unheard. It began without ceremony. No speeches, no introductions, only the click of a machine and the sudden flicker of light on the screen. Then came the voice, familiar and unmistakable. Diana's voice, steady yet tinged with emotion, filled the room. It was not the rehearsed tones of a public address, nor the carefully chosen phrases of a royal statement. It was personal, raw, the sound of a woman who had carried both love and pain in equal measure. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The people in the room were not simply hearing her words, they were confronting her presence once again. The connection between her memory and this moment was undeniable. For the nation, Diana's voice had been a source of comfort and truth, but for the royal family, it was a reminder of wounds never fully healed. Now, with the recording playing, those two worlds collided. The family heard what the public had always believed. Diana was not afraid to speak her truth, even if it unsettled the very foundations of the monarchy. Her tone was gentle but firm, carrying both a mother's love and a woman's defiance. Some in the room shifted uncomfortably, their eyes cast downward, as though they feared to meet the gaze of others while her words poured into the space. The sound of her voice was more powerful than any accusation. It carried the authority of authenticity, the undeniable weight of honesty. In that moment, the whispers of the past became flesh and blood again. The rumor had become reality, and there was no undoing it. The memory of Diana that had haunted the nation now stood before the monarchy in undeniable form. Her ghostly presence was no longer confined to flowers at Kensington Palace or the hearts of admirers. It had entered the very chambers of the crown, demanding to be heard. Every second of that recording tightened the tension in the room. No one spoke, no one dared. Even the sound of breathing seemed too loud. When the final words faded, silence descended like a shroud. It was not the silence of peace, but of reckoning. Those present knew the recording was more than just Diana's farewell. It was a revelation that would linger, reshaping how she was remembered and how the monarchy would be judged. The moment of revelation had come, and it left no one untouched. Gasps across the room. When the final notes of Diana's voice settled into silence, the room seemed suspended between past and present. For a heartbeat, no one moved. It was as though the air itself had thickened, making it difficult to breathe. The royals sat in their gilded chairs, the grandeur of the chamber suddenly irrelevant, dwarfed by the raw intimacy of what had just been heard. The recording had stripped away layers of tradition and formality, leaving only human hearts exposed. And then it happened. The first audible gasp, sharp and involuntary, broke the silence. It came from someone seated near the back, a sound quickly stifled but impossible to ignore. Like the ripple from a stone dropped into water, it spread through the room. Shoulders stiffened, hands clasped tightly, eyes glistened with the struggle to contain emotion. For William and Harry, the recording was not just a voice from history. It was their mother, alive again for those few moments, speaking directly to them. William's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed firmly forward as though bracing himself against the tide of emotion. Harry's face betrayed the storm within, his lips pressed together, fighting the urge to let grief spill over in public. Across the room, courtiers exchanged glances filled with unease. Advisors who had spent decades constructing careful narratives knew in that instant that no strategy could silence what had just been heard. Diana's words had been too honest, too vulnerable, and too full of love to be erased. The gasps in the room were not simply reactions to surprise. They were acknowledgments of truth, a recognition that the power of her voice endured far beyond her life. The Queen remained motionless, her expression unreadable, her silence unbroken. Yet even her stillness carried meaning. It was not detachment, but an unyielding attempt to contain what others could not. The monarchy had been trained for centuries to endure storms without faltering, but this was different. This was not a storm from outside, but one born from within their own family. Diana's presence had once again crossed the threshold of the palace and demanded to be reckoned with. What made the moment more unbearable was the way her words seemed to echo against each heart differently. To her sons, they were reminders of love lost. To her critics, they were a haunting vindication of her pain. To her supporters, they were confirmation that she had never stopped being the voice of the people. And to those who had tried to silence her, they were a reminder that truth has a way of outliving control. The sound of soft weeping, quickly hushed, was heard from one corner of the chamber. Another sigh followed, then another gasp, until the room was filled with the restless sounds of human emotion trying to remain dignified. No words were spoken, for words would have broken the fragile spell Diana had cast. Her voice was gone once more, but its impact clung to every soul present. In that chamber, with gasps still hanging in the air, the royal family knew that Diana had returned not in body, but in truth. Her voice had reached across time and pierced the silence. And for the first time in years, they were reminded that her presence was not bound by the grave. It lived on, reshaping the legacy they carried and the future they could not escape. Camilla's silence. As the echoes of gasps lingered in the chamber, one presence remained more unsettling than all others. Camilla sat still, her posture composed, her face unreadable. While emotions rippled across the room and the weight of Diana's words pressed upon every soul, she offered no visible reaction. Her silence was louder than any cry, more piercing than any gasp. It was the kind of silence that carried tension, one that drew every eye, if only for a fleeting moment. People wondered, if only in their hearts, what she felt as the voice of the woman who had forever altered her life filled the air once again. For years, Camilla had lived in the shadow of Diana. To the public, she was the woman who had occupied the most controversial corner of Diana's story. While the monarchy eventually embraced her role beside Charles, the people's judgment had never fully softened. Diana's memory was too beloved, too powerful, and Camilla's presence too entwined with the pain that Diana endured. And now, with Diana's voice resurrected through the recording, that shadow stretched long once more, engulfing her in a silence she could not escape. Observers described her expression as neutral, but neutrality in such a moment was itself a statement. To speak, to sigh, even to blink too heavily would have been noticed. The sons of Diana sat only a short distance away, their grief laid bare, while Camilla's silence seemed almost defiant, though perhaps it was nothing more than self-preservation. What could she have said? No defense would have been heard, no words would have mattered. In the presence of Diana's voice, she could only sit still, a figure caught between history and judgment. The courtiers avoided looking at her directly, but the tension was undeniable. Her silence became part of the narrative unfolding in that room. It was not merely an absence of sound, it was a performance of restraint, as though she understood that any visible reaction would ignite whispers beyond those palace walls. She had lived long enough within the monarchy to know that silence was both shield and weapon. Still, it did not shield her from the weight of perception. The people beyond the palace would wonder endlessly about what she felt in those moments, and speculation would weave its own truths. For William and Harry, the silence was more complicated. Their mother's words had just filled the chamber, her love, her fears, her truths spilling into their hearts. And yet the woman who had walked beside their father during their mother's darkest hours remained unmoved. They did not speak, but the tension between memory and present reality could be felt in the stillness. Camilla's silence, intentional or not, stood in stark contrast to their pain. When the recording ended and the room began to breathe again, it was her stillness that lingered. Diana had spoken. Diana had reached across time, and yet the response from Camilla was nothing but silence. In that silence, the ghosts of the past pressed heavier than ever, reminding the monarchy that some wounds were never meant to heal, and some truths would always demand their reckoning. Unveiling Diana's truths. The silence that followed the recording was almost unbearable, yet within it lingered the weight of Diana's words. They were not the words of a woman consumed by bitterness, nor were they the measured tones of diplomacy. They were the truths of a mother who had endured a life of loneliness behind gilded gates, and who wanted her sons to understand the depth of her love and the reality of her fears. What struck the room most deeply was her clarity. Diana spoke not with hesitation but with conviction, as if she knew that this recording would one day surface, and when it did, it would hold the power to speak for her when she no longer could. Her words revealed her love for William and Harry in ways that transcended time. She spoke of the joy they had brought into her life, how their laughter had been her refuge in the darkest of moments. She reminded them that they were her greatest treasures, that no matter the storm surrounding her, their existence was proof of beauty amid the pain. Her voice trembled with affection when she spoke of her dreams for them, that they would not be bound by the mistakes of the past, that they would live with compassion and courage, carrying forward the values she tried to instill in them. For William and Harry, the message was both comfort and agony, a reminder of love eternal and loss unbearable. But love was not her only legacy in that recording. Diana also revealed her fears, and in doing so, she unveiled truths the monarchy would have preferred remain hidden. She spoke of isolation, of feeling unheard and unseen, of the crushing weight of expectations that had little regard for her humanity. She spoke of betrayal and of a world where appearances mattered more than well-being. Without naming names, her voice carried the unmistakable weight of experience, the kind that pierced through the fabric of royal decorum and revealed the cracks beneath the crown. Those listening knew what this meant. Diana had not left behind a bitter farewell, but rather a testimony. Her truths carried both love and warning, as though she were speaking not only to her sons, but also to history itself. She wanted them to understand that her life had been marked by both beauty and sorrow, and that the lessons drawn from it would matter long after she was gone. Camilla's silence in the room became heavier with every word. For while Diana did not point fingers, her message did not need to. Everyone understood the context. Everyone felt the weight of what had been spoken. Diana's truths were not accusations, but they were undeniable. When the final portion of her message faded, those in the room knew they had not just heard the voice of the past. They had heard a prophecy of sorts, a warning wrapped in love, a testament that would continue to shape the monarchy. In unveiling her truths, Diana had ensured that her story could never again be silenced. Her voice had crossed time, demanding that those who lived in her shadow confront what they could no longer ignore. Public versus private legacy. The unveiling of Diana's truths within that chamber did not remain confined to the walls of the palace. Even in secrecy, such moments have a way of seeping outward, of shaping the air and altering the way people carry themselves. Those who were present knew they had witnessed something that could never be erased. It was not simply the revelation of a message. It was the reminder of how deeply Diana's legacy lived, not only in the private grief of her sons, but also in the public devotion of millions who still saw her as their own. The divide between the monarchy's inner world and the people's enduring memory of her had never felt more pronounced. In private, the royal family faced a reckoning. Diana's words had been tender yet firm, filled with love but layered with warning. For William and Harry, the recording reaffirmed what they already knew about their mother's strength, but it also reopened wounds that had never healed. Their grief, carried silently for years, was given voice once more, and it stood in sharp contrast to the restrained stillness of others in the room. The private legacy of Diana within the family was one of complexity, of love mingled with conflict, of a truth that did not fit neatly into the order the crown demanded. To the monarchy, she had been both an asset and a problem, beloved by the world yet impossible to contain. That tension had not died with her, and the recording made certain it never would. Beyond the palace gates, however, the story was far simpler. To the public, Diana was eternal. She was the young bride with shy eyes, the mother chasing her sons through gardens, the woman kneeling beside AIDS patients when others recoiled, the voice that spoke with honesty when silence would have been safer. The people did not want perfection from her. They wanted humanity, and she gave it freely. It was this humanity that kept her alive in their hearts long after her death. And it was this humanity that made the idea of her recording so powerful. They did not need to hear the tape to believe in its truth, because Diana had always embodied honesty in a world that seemed otherwise constructed. This divergence between private reckoning and public devotion was the essence of Diana's legacy. Within the palace, her memory was tangled in silence and shadow, too painful and too dangerous to confront openly. Outside, her memory was a flame that refused to burn out, a light that illuminated every anniversary, every photograph, every story shared across generations. The monarchy tried to move forward, to present stability and continuity, but the public's enduring love for Diana was a reminder that no crown could erase her presence. In the end, the recording only magnified what had always been true. Diana belonged not to the monarchy, but to the people. Her private legacy was a wound, but her public legacy was a beacon. The two could never be reconciled, and that unresolved tension was her enduring power. Even in death, she straddled two worlds, leaving the crown forever shadowed by the radiance of the people's princess. The unfinished story of Diana. The contrast between Diana's private and public legacy set the stage for a truth the royal family could never quite escape. Her story, though cut short in tragedy, did not end with her passing. In many ways, it only began anew. The recording had reignited that reality, making it impossible to ignore what millions already felt. Diana's presence was unfinished business. She was more than a chapter in royal history. She was a living narrative that continued to evolve long after her death, shaping perceptions of the crown and reminding the world that the heart of the monarchy once beat with extraordinary humanity. Within the palace, her memory was a complicated ghost. For her sons, it was a mixture of grief, love, and the burden of carrying her legacy in a world that demanded silence. For others in the family, it was a reminder of vulnerability, a chapter they would rather keep closed. Yet the recording refused to allow closure. It stood as a final testament, not neatly tied up but intentionally left open, forcing those who heard it to wrestle with truths that could not be dismissed. Diana had spoken of love, of fears, of warnings, and in doing so, she had ensured her influence reached across generations. Outside those gilded walls, the unfinished story was written on the faces of the people who still gathered to honor her. Each anniversary drew crowds to Kensington Palace. Each new documentary or revelation stirred emotions that had never cooled. The public did not see Diana as history frozen in the past. They saw her as a timeless figure, a mirror of compassion and resilience, someone who remained alive in spirit every time her name was spoken. The idea that she had left behind a message only deepened the sense that she had not finished speaking, that her story still had chapters left to unfold. The monarchy faced a dilemma it could never fully solve. How does one move forward when the past refuses to fade? Diana's light remained so vivid that even decades later it cast shadows on the present. Camilla's silence in that fateful room had spoken volumes about how deeply those shadows lingered. William and Harry, too, carried her flame in different ways, and the world watched them, measuring their every step against the memory of their mother. Diana's unfinished story lived through them, through their choices, their words, their public lives. Perhaps that is the essence of why Diana endures. She was never allowed to finish her story herself, but in leaving it incomplete, she gave it to the world. The recording only underscored that fact. Her truths were not bound to time. They were living things, carried in memory, passed down in whispers and retold with reverence. The unfinished story of Diana is not a tale of what might have been, but of what continues to be. For as long as her name is spoken, as long as her sons walk in her shadow, and as long as the crown seeks to steady itself under her gaze, Diana's story remains open, and in that openness lies her eternal power. Even in death, Diana's voice continues to echo, shaping not only the memory of a nation, but the very future of the monarchy. The recording was more than words. It was a reminder that truth cannot be silenced, that love transcends time, and that the people's princess remains a force the crown cannot contain. The royal family may try to move forward, but Diana's story is far from finished. Her legacy still breathes in every heart that remembers her, and in every shadow cast upon the palace walls. Diana lives on, not as history, but as an eternal presence.